Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about Sorry to Bother You, which has just come out in the UK. It was out in America a few months ago. And it's a... how do you describe it? It's a satire. It's a kind of dark, surreal comedy. And it's...
It also feels like a documentary. So it's a weird combination of, satire... surreal satire, but it feels like a documentary, right? It's about poor people, who basically have few options. The hero is living in his uncle's garage. The house is being repossessed. He makes this huge presentation for a job in telemarketing as if he were applying, for some major executive position. It's so important to him. So it really is about...
It's a critique more above everything else, I think, of capitalism.
It's about a critique of capitalism and America and working conditions and exploitation. It's a very, very political film, and I thought it was quite wonderful in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to give you the basic sort of rundown, it's directed by Boots Riley, who this is his first film, written and directed by Boots Riley. This is his first film. He's done music and things before this. I wasn't aware of him basically before this. Your main character is played by Lakeith Stanfield, and he plays Cassius Green.
Yes.
Who is
Cash.
Yeah, name shortened to Cash as well. And I think the name Cassius is obviously very advisedly chosen because, as you say, Cassius Clay was Muhammad Ali's sort of original name, birth name, and then he famously changed it. He called it his slave name.
Yes.
And Clay, obviously, being sort of the earth, that's what they're related to. So Muhammad Ali was kind of higher and obviously related to his conversion to Islam as well. And the idea of kind of... the idea of workers as slaves is a through line that's incredibly strong in this.
Yes.
To the point where, and I guess we'll get into spoiler territory quite quickly, and there are lots of developments in this film that can be spoiled. So my advice would be to see it as blind as you can, because the developments that come up are wild, and I don't really want to spoil them if you haven't seen them, but we will.
Yes.
So spoilers coming up now.
Okay.
What transpires is that this one particular kind of evil company with a benevolent face, which is the way capitalism kind of works these days.
And which is the face of Armie Hammer, which...
Yeah, run by Armie Hammer. Is basically a sort of new sort of slave-owning company, and is genetically modifying workers into half-human, half-horse hybrids. Well, it's just, there's a whole kind of thing going on in there. But the point is that there's this whole kind of new slavery emerging in the world of the film.
Yeah.
And so the name Cassius and the connection between workers and slaves and the idea that workers have no choice, these are all operating. So.
Yeah, so let me intervene a bit, because I think the film has a structure which I think is very interesting. So, it begins with this guy getting a job in a telemarketing company.
Yeah.
And really, the way that it's shown to you, it's like the worst of the worst of the worst job that you can imagine, right? Like, worse than working at McDonald's or something like that, right? Because they're not making any money. They're all working on commission, right? And they have no rights, and they have no health care, and just
cold calling people at home.
So you're looking at this and you're thinking, my God, this is the worst of the worst of the worst, right? And then of course what the film does is the next stage they show you is even worse, because what is the company called? Well-being? Worry-free. Which is a little bit actually like what you read in the newspapers about Apple production lines in China. Yeah, so actually it has...
Foxconn.
It has a resonance with what's happening in parts of the world today, which is that basically people eat, sleep, and work in the place that they work, right? And then you find out that they not only like eat, sleep, and so on, so they can work as much as possible, but actually they're not paid, right? So they sign their lives away so that they can have a roof over their head and food, right?
Yeah, there's talk of lifetime contracts.
Lifetime contracts, that's right. And there's this funny joke where the Armie Hammer character says, and we only whip them when we have to or something like that, right? Like, it's a lie that we treat them badly, So
and his characterization is very much in the kind of Elon Musk. I'm trying to think of other kind of super capitalists along his lines, but sort of.
The guy who runs Bezos.
Maybe like Jeff Bezos. But the reason I say Elon Musk is in that kind of cool, friendly, hip sort of way. You know what I mean?
Bezos, yeah.
Like the Elon Musk thing is very much sort of, hey, I'm cool. I'll go on a podcast and I'll smoke some weed and we're going to send a car into space. But also, I'm like hugely exploitative and evil and stupid. So that's the kind of cool sort of cool capitalism that tries to make it look like it's normal in one view. That's his mold, He wears sandals.
Okay, so in the film has this structure where what you think is really bad, it gets even worse because it becomes slavery, and then it gets even worse because people are basically experimented like Mengele, against their will, so that they could become half horse, half person, so that they could be more easily controlled, but also have greater strength and so on, so they could work more and faster and better,
be more profitable.
Yeah, and so you think you begin with as bad a situation as can be, and then the film makes it progressively worse and worse and worse. So the interesting thing about it is that it's super dystopian, really, but also very funny with it. So it doesn't feel like you're watching kind of, it's not like a noir science fiction dystopia.
No.
It's like a sunny, funny dystopia, but a dystopia nonetheless.
Well, the way it kind of structures that descent into finding out how things are worse and worse is done through Cash going up the chain.
Yeah.
So he kind of rises through classes. So he starts off as a telemarketer, and then he's so good at it that he becomes a power caller, which is that they keep on talking about like the next floor up, and people have got their own special gold elevator. This is the whole thing about class in there sort of. So he gets to the next floor up, and that's when he's on the phone to the likes of what's the name of the bloody company again? That's when he's on the phone to the likes of Worry Free. And selling, there's this thing about, on his first day as a power caller, he sold $10 million worth of blah 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 to Worry Free. Amazing, what a so he's kind of making his way, and he starts making loads and loads of money too. He moves out of his uncle's garage. He moves into this beautiful, nice sort of clean white sort of space. And the fact that it's so white is kind of important. Like, along with the fact that, as we'll get on to, he utilises a white voice on the phone to make this happen for him.
Yes.
So he accesses a kind of whiteness in his life to do this, or kind of puts one on. And he again he sort of, and that's when you start hearing more and more about sort of the slavery and whatnot at Worry Free. Though that has been a thread throughout. And then when he gets to this party that's being hosted by Armie Hammer, the CEO of Worry Free. And it becomes almost like an Eyes Wide Shut sort of secret society thing with an orgy going on and so on. And that's when he finds out the horrible truth about what they're up to, this awful genetic engineering. So it's done through this sort of rising status of Cassius. And there is a central sort of comic setup to the whole thing, which makes it work, which is normal guy, weird world. That's basically like, there's often kind of just two versions of comedy really, which is either normal guy, weird world, or weird guy, normal world. And when they clash, that's where the comedy comes from. In this, it's a normal guy who thinks he has some understanding of how the world works and finds out that it gets very, very weird very, very quickly. So it starts. So the initial weirdness is when he joins this telemarketing company, and Danny Glover, who's the kind of a wise old sage who's been doing it for years, in the cubicle next to him, says, use your white voice. And he does. There's a classic sort of very hackneyed comedy bit, particularly in America, of the difference between how white people and black people speak. And white people are all nasally, and black people are very deep voices, and that's the stereotype of them both. And what the film does is actually use that. So Cassius pinches his nose and says, "Oh, so I should talk like this," and he goes, "No, not like that." He says, being a white voice is not about the sound of the voice; it's about the attitude. You're free. You've paid all your bills. You're going to drive off in your Ferrari. Let them know that on the phone. So it's quite an interesting idea that like it's not the sound, it's the it's the attitude behind it that turns your voice white. But then the additional surreal aspect is that when he's putting on his white voice, it's voiced by David Cross, who's a white actor and comedian.
Right.
And there's another white voice a little bit later, used by the guy who is just called Mr. Blank, because his name keeps getting beeped out. His voice is done by Patton Oswalt. And it's not like it's just done for the audience. Everyone else hears these voices. So when Cassius puts on his white voice amongst his friends for a laugh, they're like, God, that's really weird. You sound like David Cross. Well, they don't say that, but so it's not just a conceit for the audience. It kind of exists within the film.
Okay, I want to say something about the voice, because one of the things that's threaded through the whole film is a critique of racism. So his name is Cassius. His nickname is Cash. So you already have a kind of both a connection and a dichotomy there. He puts on his white voice, and the white voice is what helps him be a success telemarketing. But ultimately, as he rises up the scale, you realize, that in this world, he'll always be, in quotation marks, the nigger, because really what the Army Hammer character wants to use him for is to become, half man, half horse, so that he can pretend to be a Martin Luther King character, but only as a totemic figure, so that the horseman could be further enslaved, right?
Army Hammer kind of anticipates that when he's created his millions of horse people, that they will create their own society and culture and want to rebel. And so he wants to nip that in the bud and get ahead of it and use Cassius as a horseman, turn him into one, so that he can become a kind of deep state version of Martin Luther King.
Which is very clever.
Which is a very clever idea.
And it's also a way of threading in all of this commentary on race in America, which is actually very complexly done, and it's kind of, it appears sidelines or directly or metaphorically at every single level of the film, really, which I thought was really great.
Yeah. So what you're saying about Cassius, he's always going to be a second-class citizen.
That's right.
He's always going to be the black guy.
Yeah.
Is absolutely true, because he's kind of notable for. It's interesting that there are white people in that telemarketing room. There are people of all races, and some of them are white, and none of those people has access to a white voice like he does.
Yes.
Right. So it is about whiteness is connected to class and socioeconomic status, not race. Not exactly. But then when he gets up into the higher echelons,
you realise that the race is absolutely fundamental.
Race is absolutely fundamental. And so when he gets to that party, that eyes wide shut party at the top, when he meets Army Hammer, there's a room full of people, particularly white people, and Army Hammer's kind of surrounded by women, and he's been the king of the castle, and he wants Cassius to tell him stories of life on the street in Oakland. He says, turn off the white voice. So he does. And he resumes talking in his actual voice. But he says, I've never had to cap anyone in the ass. He's using Army Hammer's words there. Army Hammer says, tell us about capping people in the ass or whatever. So he's using the stereotypes. And he says, I bet you can rap. And he says, I can't rap, actually. I'm really good at listening to rap, but I can't rap, and actually it's really embarrassing. And then they try and make him rap. And there's this very funny scene where they give him a microphone, and they're all kind of... they provide him a beat, and he's awful. He can't even rhyme two lines together. And then he... I don't want to repeat it.
Well, but it's a joke in the film, so actually I think we need to repeat it. So
it's a joke in the film that he gives up trying to rhyme, and he just goes, nigger, kill, or something like that.
That's right, that's all he says.
And then
he just repeats it. I mean, I'm not...
over, and then it becomes a thing that everyone starts joining in with.
So everyone can repeat... So all these white people, right, kind of, what they understand of rap is just nigger, kill. That's the way that they're absorbing it and transcribing it, and... that's all they hear, and actually that's all they want to hear. So that in itself is very telling. But can I shift the conversation a little bit, because I think we're not touching on one of the things that is to me fundamental about this film, which is that it is really a film about social change, right? So the strike is fundamental, resistance is fundamental. Behaving morally and ethically with responsibility to your co-workers is kind of fundamental. There are references to Norma Ray and things like that, right? I mean, this is a film about kind of, people creating change or being pushed, to kind of change their circumstances and the way that they go about it. I mean, I can remember the last time I saw a strike organizer in a film.
Well, I mean, interestingly, it made me think of Robin Hood again, because just insofar as when I said in the podcast on Robin Hood that I believed in the feeling of the fight that it communicated, and I still do. I still think that's fair. It's very much the same in this. That feeling of the intensity of the fight and what they stand for and the importance of it is brilliantly conveyed in this. Enormously powerful, and the fact that it's kind of it has this realistic air to it. So despite the fact it's quite an absurdist sort of film, the strike is about they're unionizing.
Yes.
There's unions are hated in America, and they're hated here as well. But they're hated in America, and there's always talk of kind of shutting down the unions and firing workers if they threaten to even think about unionizing. I mean, in this they really put an effort into actually they're not cowed by it in this. I kind of thought that's where the film would go. Actually, I thought that they would talk about unionizing and try to do it and end up being crushed.
Yes.
But it's not the case. They have more success than that, and they're able to actually build a fight and build a case.
But I think to me it's interesting that it's a film about that, right? And I thought the character, what's her name, Detroit, the girlfriend,
Tessa Thompson.
Yeah, Tessa Thompson. The character that she plays is also kind of very interesting because she's a feminist and she's an artist, and she's constantly creating things with a political message. So she makes rings, earrings that are like big penises, or earrings with political messages, or earrings with logos, critiquing logos. Yeah. And so her whole kind of arts project and so on is very interesting. And actually, I also thought that the love affair was depicted in a very interesting manner because, there's never a question of them loving each other, right? But there is a question of, can you be with someone who behaves unethically? Which again is a question I haven't seen in cinema very recently, right? Where kind of people's ethics are also who they are, with him crossing the picket line.
Yeah. She says you're becoming a scout because he's now in the higher echelons of the company. He's a power caller now, and they're setting up this picket line to strike. And she says, if you cross this picket line when you go into work today, we're through.
Yes.
Which is pretty strong.
Yes.
But absolutely justified, and you feel it, and you agree with her, really.
Yes. So the film is very interesting on a lot of levels. I also thought it was visually interesting, right? It had a lot of visual gags or interesting images there was a lot of effort kind of put into kind of making the film work as a movie. It wasn't just a series of sketches, yeah? On the other hand, I really hated the look of it. It's grainy and dark and...
I had some issues with that. I think the lighting in some scenes is really good, but other scenes it does feel very dark, I think the look of it doesn't cohere enough. I just don't think it looks good enough.
Yes.
I don't think there are massive flaws with the way it looks, but I did feel that there was a lack kind of visually.
But it has visual imagination. The scenes where he calls people and he ends up being in their living room, right? There are kind of gags like that I think are work very well, and they're visual. And kind of, some framings, like, when he's looking through doorways and, or when the scene where he goes into the toilet, those are very good. The scenes in the mansion, for example, are horrible, right? Like the orgy scene, you can barely see anything, and actually you don't think it's a patterned look, and it looks really grainy and cheap somehow, right? And even scenes like, with Tessa, with her working her sign, at the very beginning of the film, you think, they could have made that into something interesting visually, and they just didn't.
Yeah, right? I didn't quite understand the frame. Everything just seems a little bit badly framed at those points. I saw, even though the idea is that she's not really twirling the sign very well, she's just kind of enjoying it. you can't even really see her
Yeah.
enjoying it. It's not if the camera would just pull back a bit in those shots. I felt.
Yes, it's very kind of inexpert in that way.
But again, but on the other hand, there are these moments of charm, like you say, like when he's making those calls right at the start, and when someone picks up the phone, his desk crashes down into where they live, and he ends up opposite someone mourning the loss of their husband, or he ends up
sex.
opposite a couple of people fucking on a couch, is great. And there's also that sweet little montage where when he's becoming rich and he's kind of upgrading his lifestyle in his sort of apartment, like his crappy old TV like falls apart physically. It's a prop that physically comes apart in half and is replaced by a flat screen TV.
No.
And it's like a Michel Gondry thing. And then the film actually references Michel Gondry a little bit later on with the claymation stuff. It's that promo film that Armie Hammer shows Cassius, and it's all done in claymation.
Oh, right.
And it says at the start, directed by Michel Dongri.
Oh, right, okay, I missed that. Yeah.
So it's very deliberately picking up on that, and those parts are wonderful. They're really good fun to look at and kind of quite visually exciting. So it definitely has its charms.
Yes.
But they are intermittent.
I found also that the film didn't quite cohere for me. So, I was enjoying it very much, and I thought how inventive and how great to see these things. And then at a certain point, I began looking at my watch. Right? Like, how long?
Do you remember when?
Yes. It was after the orgy, after he's talked to her, and you just think, where's this going? Like, it lost some of the fizz, and it began to feel flat. And then it kind of, it perked up again. Then it has moments.
Yeah.
But then you're kind of waiting for it to end. It didn't feel... I think it's a film of moments and pieces. And it has, like, a wonderful central idea. But it's not tightened up.
I do know what you mean, and I kind of agree. What I would say is that I think it might feel very different on second viewing because there are so many surprises in the film in terms of its plot development that part of that experience, and for me kind of one of the joys, is really not knowing where it's going to go. Because I'd seen the trailer, and what I knew from the trailer was it's a kooky satire about telemarketing, and in the trailer you see this whole thing of him getting his white voice, and that it's not just him putting on a voice, but it's actually someone else's voice. So I kind of that's a fun idea, but I didn't see anything else that would be coming in the film, I just thought that would be it. So the fact that the white voice stuff, maybe halfway, 2/3 of the way through the film, is actually dropped, you don't really hear it for very long after that, is interesting, because then you're getting into the mansion, and then you're getting into the, like I say, the meeting with Armie Hammer, and by that point I'm going, I really don't know where this film's going next, and I was excited about that. There were so many kind of possibilities the film had opened up with its various plot strands. That I thought there's so many ways it can kind of combine its stories and resolve things and develop them, which I thought were great. So when he goes into the room with the olive door, when he's looking for the bathroom, and he comes across the horse creature, it's a complete shock. It's from out of nowhere. You've had no indication at all that there would be something like that in this film.
It becomes a completely different movie.
It does. And I think it's great. And I think, there are issues with the fact that it kind of... I think it leads to a certain lack of coherence, because it does change, it shifts so severely. But on the other hand, I love it. I think it's so imaginative and kind of bold and brave. I think the flaws that introduces are hugely outweighed by the positives.
I think that's right. I mean, it is inventive, it is political, it is funny, right? It's scathing, in fact. It has a real critique of the culture that we live in, and actually, it offers a way out in a way, So I think it's a film, worth talking about really and supporting, and certainly it was enjoyable, right? Like. To say it has all these faults, which I do think it does, doesn't mean that it's kind of not a film, that you won't enjoy seeing and certainly kind of enjoy talking about as well, So A film. I always think that a film that actually has real laughs, is always good in some way, right? Like, and kind of, and this, aside from the laughs that it does offer, and it is a comedy, and it does work as a comedy, it's also kind of offering, quite a lot more, I think.
The film also shares more than a kind of minor resemblance, I think, to Get Out.
That's right.
In that, I already mentioned sort of the thing about a normal guy stuck in a weird world sort of thing, which is clearly where that's the mode that Get Out works in.
Yes.
He kind of gets into this very, very weird world. But also the in the kind of medical experimentation. Because obviously in Get Out, well, it's not so much experimentation as kind of use, but it's medical procedures. In Get Out, the idea is, this is spoilers, I guess, for Get Out, but you should have seen it, it's great. The idea in Get Out is that white people, kind of affluent white people, are using black people's bodies. They're kind of inserting themselves in, like being John Malkovich, to prolong their lives. And there's a whole... I mean, people have commented more than is necessary for me to bring up about kind of the analogies to slavery and kind of subjugation of black people and so on. And what's happening in Sorry to Bother You, the kind of the medical procedure is about turning workers into kind of horse-human hybrids. So it's not about black people specifically, it's about people of lower class.
Yes.
That's where the kind of that's where it is, and I think it's definitely the case that the horse has been chosen very specifically. I think
Yes.
as it's a beast of burden, but also I think that there is a racial component to it. That they mentioned that as kind of, I suppose, one of the pros of being turned into a half horse thing, you get a huge cock.
Yes.
And I think that is drawing on the stereotype of black men having large penises.
Of course, without a doubt. I mean, it's very pointedly drawn out.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that the film isn't kind of going 100% down the route of connecting this to black subjugation in particular. It's a class thing. As everything in the film is more about a class thing.
But it's not just a class thing, because our protagonist is black. So it's true that it kind of puts race within a class context, and that's very important, and it's very interesting that the film, and intelligent that the film does so. But nonetheless, it is primarily about race, right? Kind of, just by virtue of having the protagonist and the world, and so many of the references, the being made to sing a rap song, and all of those things. So I think you're right to point out the connections with Get Out, because it is another denunciation of racial politics in contemporary America as a re-enslaving, done under a so-called liberal guise, but actually kind of removing people's rights. And I think even the class component has a racial dimension, in the sense, that it's not just black people who are being turned into slaves and beasts of burden now, but actually all poor people. Right? Yeah. So but again, kind of like in so much of American culture and history, it's like the history of slavery is almost like a baseline to every other discourse. Yeah.
Well, it's that thing. I think I've said it before, and I definitely copied it off someone, but I don't know who I copied it off. The idea that every story in America is about race, and every story in Britain is about class. And I think there's a kind of general and kind of, I guess, sort of slightly amusing truth to that. But what is kind of underneath both of those is that stories about race in America are also about class.
Yes.
And race is just connected to class in a very... It's not that it's not here, but it is so much more transparently, I think, in American stories.
Yes.
And so the way that the way in which Sorry to Bother You very transparently combines them,
yes,
is really interesting.
Yes.
Is very notable, at least. It's also offering a whole commentary on the establishment and kind of commodification, which I think is interesting. It has, and in this respect, there was a kind of Black Mirror feel to it. And I'm thinking particularly of the Black Mirror episode, I think it's called 15 Million Credits. It's one from the first series, I think, with Daniel Kaluuya, becoming a kind of he's a kind of slave. He's housed in a place by the corporation that kind of owns him, I guess. And he's kind of fed and entertained there and sleeps there, and then goes to work riding these cycles. And there's a kind of TV competition X Factor thing in that episode. I think I'm remembering it very vaguely, so I might be wrong about the details. But as I recall it, he kind of starts to see this X Factor type thing as a path to sort of freedom, breaking the system, and actually becomes sort of enveloped by it in a way. I think that's anyway. That this film has a whole kind of tone of that as well. With, for instance, when Cassius is breaking the picket, he gets a Coke can thrown at his head, and he starts bleeding. He has this bandage on his head basically for the rest of the film. And the girl who threw it, she kind of took a video of herself while she was doing it, and she becomes kind of a star. And initially, it's like a counterculture star thing, like, you know, I'm part of the rally, I'm part of the picket. Fuck this guy for breaking the picket. And then what happens? She gets her own TV show called something like "Have a Coke can to the head and smile, bitch," or something like that. Like, it's proper sort of dystopian, kind of absorbed by the establishment, commodified stuff. People start wearing these kind of afro wigs with Coke cans in them. You know, this merchandise of this kind of countercultural act. And that's not the only example, but the film has several.
The worst example is the Beat the Shit Out of You show, where actually somebody presents themselves, and really the program is about beating the shit out of them.
Yeah, I just got the shit kicked out of me, I think it's called.
So, which reminds me of Jerry, the TV talk show host that they made an opera about.
Oh, Springer.
Jerry Springer.
Yeah.
Right, but like an extraordinarily extreme version of that, right?
Yeah.
Where kind of, you know, they just grab somebody, you know, two thugs grab you by the arms, you know, and while another one just beats the crap out of you.
Well, there was this internet video from 2001, 2002 maybe, that was called the Kicked in the Nuts Show. I think it was a parody of that kind of crap TV, but the joke in the show was a guy in a big orange wig runs up to someone on the street, kicks them in the nuts, and they get pissed off. And then he stops, points at the camera that's filming them covertly, and says, "My friend, you've just been kicked in the nuts." And that was and so like it seemed to me a reference to that.
Yes.
Well, like, you know, the things. The difference with Kicked in the Nut Show is that it was kind of covert, but then what would happen in the Kicked in the Nut Show is once people realised that they were on TV, they'd go, "Oh, I get it, oh, it's great, I'm on TV," as opposed to continuing to be pissed off that they got kicked in the nuts. So the difference in this, obviously, is that people are presenting themselves to be beaten up knowingly. But there's a kind of similarity there, I think. But just the idea of kind of everything in the film is available to be commodified, like kind of the establishment can absorb anything. When they first rise up in the telemarketing office, right? They all agree outside, you know, we're gonna say phones down, and we're gonna stop calling, and we're gonna strike, and they do it. And Cassius takes part in it, and then he goes into like a manager's office expecting to be fired. And what happens at that moment is actually, you've been promoted.
Yeah.
Like, so the moment that, you know, he actually takes a stand against what's happening, they absorb him. They absorb him even more and take him to the next level.
That's right.
You know, and then the kind of the final stage of that in the film, well, it's slightly different, but the final stage of that, I think it's related, is when he goes on the I got the shit kicked out of me show, and he presents himself to have the shit kicked out of him on the understanding that they will show this tape that he's managed to get of the horse people being badly treated, and of Armie Hammer in particular being part of it. He shows it, and then what happens? No one cares. And actually, Armie Hammer is turning into an even bigger celebrity, and the business goes through the roof financially, because everyone's going, "What a genius. Look at the genetic breakthrough that they've done." No one understands the severity of what they've just seen. They don't care.
That's right. So that's a critique of, you know, the mediatized social world we live in, and I think very effective too. But I want to talk about two things, and, you know, make sure I don't forget. So the first is the participation in this film of Danny Glover and Armie Hammer, and it's produced by Forrest Whitaker, right? So, you know, this is a project that's been really supported by, you know, heavyweights, really.
Yeah, big names.
Big names. So it's obviously kind of a project that people want to be a part of and support, the person saying it and also what is being said. And I just think, that that's worth remarking on because, certain kinds of films actually need the support of these heavyweights in order to kind of, be made and also be circulated. So that's the first thing. I just wanted to mention it. And also that they're very good. Certainly Danny Glover and Armie Hammer is surprisingly good, I thought. The other thing is I want to talk about the enormous richness of films made by black filmmakers at the moment. There's been a whole spate of them in the last year, which I think collectively are quite incredible, and that nonetheless seem to be going hand in hand with what people are saying is a decline in cinema, right? So on the one hand you have like this decline of the medium, but on the other hand, kind of these great works are being made, and these really interesting works are being made, and particularly collectively. Yeah, within the past 12 or 18 months, we've seen Black Panther, we've seen Moonlight, we've seen Get Out, we've seen Widows more recently. This my tea. This film, and I'm sure many others that I'm now forgetting, right?
The first Purge comes to mind for me.
The first Purge, the Equalizer 2, right? So there's a whole range of like really fascinating films made by black filmmakers. Black Klansman,
yeah.
Right? On almost all levels of filmmaking, from big budget genre pieces like The Equalizer 2 to horror like Get Out and The First Purge, right? To comedies like this,
and Black Panther, which is just on its own level.
And its own level, to superhero films, right? So I think that's worth remarking upon.
Yeah.
Because I actually can't remember another year like this. I just can't think of a year in which there's been, so many great films, or like really good ones, with going through such a diversity of genres, that explore kind of issues of interest, not only to black audiences, though I think there might be a primary address to them, but actually kind of, to anyone interested in what's happening to American culture, So I think it's kind of a phenomenal year, and what I wanted to kind of raise is, the issue, isn't it interesting when people are saying, oh, cinema is dead and blah blah, and Netflix has taken over the world and whatever, that it's also arises at the same time as this very considerable diversity of films made by black filmmakers is coming out. So I think that's worth celebrating, and particularly since kind of all of these things kind of shift, right? Like, Sorry to Bother You has this great joke where, friends are sitting, chatting, and, one of them says, are Italians white? No, fuck off. Italians aren't white. And they go, oh, they became white 60 years ago.
Yeah.
They became white, but only 60 years ago, right?
Which is a brilliant joke.
It's a brilliant joke, and it just kind of, shows, kind of, how race and ethnicity in many ways is a social construct, and how kind of that shifts over time, as kind of discourses around it shift over time. And, kind of that made for a great joke. But this is kind of something to celebrate, particularly in the current political context, which is like so down and negative, and it feels so dystopian. It feels like there's no way out, and there's Trump, and there's Brexit, and and so on. Yeah. I think actually to make a really funny film that shows a situation being really worse than even this, and kind of finding a solution and kind of solidarity, I think is quite wonderful, and being very funny about it.
Yeah, and I think the solidarity is one little moment in the film I really loved was right at the end when the horse people have been freed, and then they in turn free Cassius, and they connect. The Korean guy in the group, it says he puts his fist to his chest and he says something like "same fight," something like that, like the fight that we have against against our oppressors is the same as yours, even though you're in a slightly worse position in that you're a horseman.
Yes.
But I just I like that, and it reminded me of things like Pride, for instance, where the idea of the whole tension in Pride is, will gay Londoners get on with hardy Welsh miners? And what they discover is that they have the same fight, and together they're stronger.
Yes.
Now, it's only a small element, like that's only a tiny moment in this, but it's still kind of, I liked that it was in there. I liked the...
well, it's a tiny moment, but it's part of a larger thread throughout the film.
Yeah, exactly.
So... there's
one more thing which might be worth talking about, which is the director, Boots Riley, had a it's interesting, actually, the comparison between this and Black Klansman is... and this was something that I noted when I saw the trailer at first, which was that the idea of being able to, a black person who would normally be kind of ignored or badly treated in some way, being able to display themselves as white over the phone. So in Black Klansman, obviously that's kind of central.
Yes.
Ron Stallworth in that film is able to have conversations with David Duke thinking that he's white and being quite candid with him. And obviously in this, there's the whole kind of conceit of the white voice.
Yes.
It is kind of central to how Cassius moves up in the world, moves up in the company at least. And there was. It's funny that there was Boots Riley had quite a strong sort of criticism of Black Klansman when it came out, and they were out at the same time in America. There may have been a slight rivalry, but I don't know. But he talked very very interestingly and very severely about something that I hadn't thought about at all, which was the idea that it's a problem in Black Klansman that the police are made to be the heroes in a fight against racism, whereas actually the police are a huge, huge problem, and as we've seen over the last few years, it's been exposed.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's got worse, but it's certainly been exposed more and more. So and obviously, like, the police are the heroes in that film. There is a certain amount of internal racism in the department, but essentially they're the good guys in this fight, which was an interesting perspective that I hadn't considered at all when I saw it. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
I'm not sure I agree in a way. Black people are part of the police force, and they do live in a particular state. And to say, that you can't show policemen, for that matter, or black policemen, kind of being heroic, seems to me to be wrong and divisive. And also, I mean, just kind of for the record, I also don't like when people of a minority critique, somebody else of a minority in... I mean, I don't mind if they do it like, in a journal or something, but to come out in the media and effectively to try to damage the film at the moment of release, rather than later on, having reflection on what's being done and why and so on. It seems to me to be impolitic and lacking in the very solidarity that he tries to convey in this film.
That's interesting, yeah.
I think there's a time and a place for things, and to try to kill, a film's box office by critiques like that doesn't strike me as good policy or good politics.
I think that's kind of fair. Nonetheless, if you want to read his criticism, he put it out on Twitter. He put it out in a series of images, actually, because you can contain a lot more text in an image than 140 characters or whatever. But it is very interesting to read.
Okay.
It talks about the kind of changes that were made to the true story behind Black Klansman in order to build a different kind of point.
Okay, well, that would be interesting to look at.
So that's interesting to look at, certainly.
So maybe that's something that you can put in...
Yeah, I'll put that in the description then. Why not?
Yeah, that'll be good.
But I think I've... It's funny, I feel like there's more to say about Sorry to Bother You, but I'm not entirely sure what it is. I think it does need a little bit of time to cohere, and I would be interested to see it a second time to see how well it coheres now that I know the whole story.
Yes, I'm less keen on doing that.
No, I don't think I'll go back to the cinema to see it again, but certainly when it's available on home media, I'd be interested in watching it twice.
Okay.
Just for my own elucidation, not for another podcast. But I mean, I'm glad that it's it's so imaginative. Like it is deeply flawed, and I think the way that it's put together is lacking. and the way the story is told does feel like it does feel like it lacks a certain something, but it's full of energy and full of ideas, and I really enjoyed the fact that I just at points properly did not know where it was going to go next,
Yes.
in the best way.
And also, it's funny. I think we need to repeat that, right? Like, I think people will, it's all that Mike said, and it's also very funny. And it's a smart, it's smart.
Yeah.
So, sometimes, like, films are very slick, and kind of very well made in quotation marks, but also really dumb, right? Kind of, this is almost the opposite. It's rough in parts, but actually it's a really intelligent movie, right? So to be intelligent and to be funny is already, like, quite something.
And I really love, I think one final thing that's on my mind is that I really love Tessa Thompson's character, and particularly what I love is that you could very easily criticise the film for having only one female character of any note, which is her, and all the other characters are male, and that's definitely true. But it would definitely be a weakness of your kind of criticism to suggest that she's just kind of filling a role, ticking boxes. Like, she is as forceful and as kind of smart and interesting as any of the other characters, and
Yes.
she has a force of nature in it.
And she's a conscience, and actually it's not quite true to say she's the only female character. There's the boss,
The
trainee.
kind of the
I mean, it's
the
a
boss
small,
with the funny name. That's it.
Well, it's a small role, but she's got like 3 scenes where she leads.
Yeah.
So it's not nothing. But kind of point taken, but in both ways. I mean, she is the only leading female character in the film. But what a character it is! She's a really interesting and powerful presence.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We are eavesdropping at the movies.
We're on iTunes, SoundCloud, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Cheerio.